I was born in Wichita, Kansas on November 19, 1925. When I was in high school, a Navy recruiter came to our campus when I was, before I reached 18 years of age, and he was looking for pilot applicants to become Navy pilots. And it was kind of unusual because I hadn't studied for my chemistry test, which was going to be at the same hour that his interview was going to be. So it was a good excuse for me to go to the interview and not the chemistry test. I later graduated from the University of Southern California on the 6th of June, 1947, and began my career as a commissioned officer at that time.
William McGonagle began a long and successful naval career as an ensign aboard the destroyer Frank Knox in 1947. After serving in various duty stations ashore and afloat throughout the Korean and Vietnam Wars, McGonagle took command of the technical research ship USS Liberty, which was performing intelligence operations in the Mediterranean in 1966. By June of 1967, tensions between Israel and the neighboring states of Egypt, Jordan, and Syria had reached the breaking point, and the Liberty's crew found themselves sailing just a few nautical miles from the center of the unfolding six-day war.
I took command of the USS Liberty, a technical research ship which normally operated on the west coast of Africa. It was a merchant ship that had been used during World War II, Korea and Vietnam, that had been remothballed and had been converted to perform the functions of a technical research ship for the Navy. We were on our third deployment to the west coast of Africa when we were diverted from the port city of Abidjan, the Ivory Coast. We were ordered to operate in an area in international waters near the Sinai coast. We arrived about 6 o'clock in the morning. The skies were completely clear, unlimited visibility. During the morning, we conducted a general drill, and I wasn't satisfied with the time that it took the crew to close all of the watertight doors and prepare the ship for battle. So I got on the public address system and told them that the ship is in a potentially hazardous situation and that the next time it might not be a drill. We arrived on our initial navigational point, at which time we turned to a southwesterly heading so that we could parallel the coastline from near the town of El Arish back to the west toward Egypt. At that time we slowed to 5 knots. We checked to make sure that our flag was flying freely, and it was. And within a very short period of time, the ship was circled by unidentified aircraft. They didn't close the ship close enough that we could identify them, but we were surveilled again about every hour and a half to 2 hours, and sometimes the planes would circle high over the ship, but again they stayed at a distance that we weren't sure whose they were. And little did I realize at that time that in less than 5 minutes' time I would have crew members dying on deck and others being killed by unidentified jet fighter aircraft. An incident like this has a life of its own. They strafed the ship, they dropped napalm on the ship, rockets, and later on, 3 motor torpedo boats also launched torpedoes and we noticed that the flag of Israel was flying from the motor torpedo boats.
One torpedo struck the side of the ship just forward of the bridge. The explosion crippled the vessel, inflicting numerous casualties and injuring McGonagle himself. Despite the severity of his wounds, McGonagle refused any treatment that would take him away from the ship's con and continued to direct evasive maneuvers, damage control, and care of casualties. It was not until the Liberty's rendezvous with an American destroyer, more than 17 hours later, that McGonagle, weak from loss of blood, finally relinquished command and allowed himself to be carried from the bridge. But it was still unclear exactly who had attacked the Liberty's crew or why.
Throughout the night following the attack, no one really knew where we were or who had made the attack on the ship until we'd gotten back to port. And then we learned that it was the Isreali, and that they said it had been a case of mistaken identity. And I wanted to believe that it was a case of mistaken identity. But in the past 30 years, there has been evidence to indicate that it was a case of a deliberate attack on the ship. After the attack, we learned that when our initial report that we had been under attack was received, one of the aircraft carriers launched planes to come to our assistance on the authority of the commanding officer of that carrier. But before those planes arrived, they were recalled to the carrier, and a couple of hours later, both carriers launched aircraft to come to our assistance. And both of those flights were also recalled to the carrier. And we have not yet, after 30 years, been able to determine who called the planes back. Before the ceremony in Washington, D.C., I was talking with the Secretary of the Navy, and I told him, well, you know, this was my third afloat command, and I was just doing my duty as the commanding officer. I knew what those duties were. And if I didn't, they shouldn't be sending me to command ships at sea. And that I didn't think I should receive the Medal of Honor, because I was just doing what I knew was my responsibility. And he says, well, Bill, I'll tell you. And you know, the secretary can get away with that by calling captains Bill. That's okay. So he says, when you and Admiral Moore have finished your coffee, we're going to go right out there and we're going to have this ceremony just like we've planned for some time. And of course, my only response to that, the only response possible, was, aye, aye, sir. It's a very humbling experience. It's allowed me to associate with people that I've read their citations, and some of the things they did are astounding to me. And I'm proud to be associated with them. We weren't supposed to be a combatant ship. We were an auxiliary. We weren't supposed to be engaged in any battle. And we didn't. We had damage inflicted upon us. But since that time, there's been very little on it. And I want to know, and I feel my officers and crew have a right to know what happened